Welcome to the program. I'm Jeff Schechtman. Several years ago, the tech company Cisco ran a campaign talking about the human network. It tried to humanize their networking products as more than just wires and routers, but focused on the human beings at the other end of those wires and the collective experience of connection. All of that was before the social networks that have been like steroids into the social connections that have been with us really since man first stepped out of his cave and talked to his neighbor. Today, because of speed, and I guess also because of greater self-awareness, we see ourselves as part of a kind of networking feedback loop. Who we connect with impacts who we become, and who we are impacts who we connect with. If all of this sounds a bit abstract, my guest Matthew Jackson will put it all in perspective. Matthew Jackson is the William Eberly Professor of Economics at Stanford. He's an external faculty member of the Santa Fe Institute and a senior fellow at the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. He's been researching social and economic networks for more than 25 years. He's written the definitive text on the subject and is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and a fellow at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It is my pleasure to welcome Matthew O. Jackson here to talk about the human network, how your social position determines your power, beliefs, and behaviors. Matthew, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Well, it's great to have you here. One of the things you talk about is how we're constantly kind of reevaluating our networks and rewiring our networks. Talk a little bit about that first.
I mean, I guess when you think about the current technology, the internet has changed the way in which we have access to things. It's constantly suggesting new friends to you and new connections, and that's changing the way that our networks evolve.
And talk about the way in which the actual process of connecting is impacting the kind of human aspect of those connections.
What is changing is our perception of what other people are doing, in the sense that now we're in constant reminders of where people are or what updates they're putting on their sites, and so there's sort of a flood of information that's coming in on a constant basis, which is being filtered by these perspectives on what the rest of our friends are doing, and that kind of interaction is new and different.
And in that context of what's new and different, talk a little bit about the patterns that begin to emerge. And there are so many patterns that you talk about in the book, whether they're political or social. I mean, there's very clear patterns that emerge from all of this.
This tendency of humans to associate with people who are very similar to themselves. So we're more likely to connect with other people who are of the same ethnicity, religion, gender, age, profession, and for lots of reasons. We're sort of usually put together with these people. So this is something that is constantly happening, and the new technology makes it easier to connect with people who are similar to ourselves, and so that sort of reinforces that, and when we like certain things, it finds what we like, and it feeds us more of that. And that happens not only in terms of the kinds of media we're exposed to, but also the people we're exposed to.
And one of the things that becomes clearer and clearer in understanding all of this is no matter how much we try and force diversity, no matter how much we try and desegregate ourselves, that we wind up segregating ourselves anyway by the nature of our networks.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's a very difficult tendency to overcome, and in one study we did, we looked inside high schools, and we were looking at one high school that was a little more than half white and almost half black, and yet inside that high school, so it looked well integrated from the outside, but when you looked inside, the kids were 15 times more likely to be friends with somebody of their own race than across races. So inside the high school, the friendships were incredibly segregated. And that tendency is so strong that it's really difficult to overcome. And, people feel more comfortable with people that are similar to themselves and have similar experiences and backgrounds and viewpoints. Being aware of it helps, but overcoming it is very difficult.
Were there any places or situations that you have found in your research where it was at least easier to overcome that sense of people only wanting to identify with and network with people that are like themselves?
I guess one environment where it becomes a little bit easier is, to some extent, is some there's they attempt to build teams that are more diverse and deliberately, but in our normal day-to-day social interactions, it's a much more difficult force to overcome.
How much are we aware of this? To what extent do we really have a sense of how this is playing out? And how much are we really completely unaware of? Are we really fooled in how our networks work?
I mean, I think, we're all somewhat aware of it in the sense that we do realize that, we rely on people for a lot of things and that the people around us aren't, necessarily typical of the whole population. But at the same time, I don't think we have nearly the appreciation that we should for how strong those patterns are. And when you actually look at the networks, the segregation patterns are overwhelming. And the cliquishness of networks is really quite striking. So when you look at human networks, they really separate strongly. And that's something that I think helps us understand a lot of things, from the current polarization that's going on to persistent differences in access to jobs and employment. These kinds of things are really heavily dependent on these networks. And the more that we understand these structures, the more we can appreciate that. And I think it's sort of an extent that we don't realize how important they are.
Is the same true of our relationship to institutions? Do we have the same kind of networking interaction with respect to institutions that we do with individuals?
To some extent, and I think that's being reinforced with social media. Now, if you think about which news sites you tend to get news from, especially on the internet, that becomes reinforced by what you've liked in the past and where you've navigated in the past and what's fed to you. So there's a lot going on now, which sort of reinforces our natural tendencies to look for things that resonate with us and that are similar to ourselves, and so institutionally it happens as well.
One of the things you talk about is this kind of paradox that we don't really understand the nature of our networks and our relationships. We think we have more friends than we have, or we think we have less friends. Expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So there's a fascinating thing called the friendship paradox. And what it actually refers to is, if you have the feeling that your friends are more popular than you are, it's actually true. It's a fact. They really are. So what that means is, on average, people who are being followed have a lot more followers than the people who are following them. So, just as an example, so imagine somebody has 20 friends and somebody has 2 friends. The person who has 20 friends is influencing 20 people, or seen as a friend by 20 people. The person who has 2 friends is only being seen by 2. So that means that people with the most friends in our society end up being most influential and counted as friends by the most people. And that's true in all of our friendship networks. The people that we have as friends tend to be not typical individuals, but they tend to be the most connected people in the society. And that means that we take our friendship to be, our friends usually to be a sample from the population, but they're not a typical sample. And people who are more connected tend to be different in many ways.
What it really tells us also is this idea of influencers and people that have outsized impact on people around them really is true.
Yes, yeah. I mean, a fascinating example actually comes from middle school, where when you look at the kids who have the most friends, they tend to be the kids who try smoking at the earliest age, they drink at the earliest age, they try drugs at the earliest age, And so that sort of distorts the view that all these kids have of what's normal, because the kids that are the big influencers are the ones that are doing the most experimentation with drugs, alcohol, and smoking. And so they have a biased perception that, they're always looking to the most popular kids, and those kids are acting differently than the typical kid.
Is there such a thing then in this framework of the typical kid? Just staying on this metaphor for the moment, because it's only typical of a particular group.
Yes, yeah, that's true as well. So then when you sort of put this together with this idea of this separation, this homophily, where people are separating according to, finding people that they like, then you have both segregated patterns and you have, influencers within those groups. But very different groups can have completely different behaviors, and that helps explain a lot of, economic disparities in terms of access to jobs and access to education.
Talk a little bit about that, because you've written a lot about the economic part of this and how it perpetuates certain economic groups, economic categories.
Sure. So, the fact that 50 to 70% of our jobs come through referrals means that we're really heavily dependent upon others to get jobs. And that means if our friends aren't well employed, we're not going to be well employed. Even if you've got great qualifications, it's hard to get a job. And that sort of has a feedback effect. It means that groups that aren't well connected to employment end up not having much of a chance of getting their people employed, and then they become discouraged and drop out of the labor force. So you see pockets of strongly unemployed individuals and then strongly employed individuals, and they tend to correlate among groups. And it's also true of who goes to university. If you're in a group where none of your friends have gone to school onto university, the chances that you will be small. You won't know what it takes to get there, and your parents won't know what it takes to get there. So these kinds of things reinforce themselves and have strong economic consequences.
What do we learn when we look at those individuals that are able to, and I'm not sure how rare they are, you can speak to that are able to move from one group to another, that are able to change the networks that they're involved in? How complex is that, and what do we learn from looking at those individuals that accomplish that?
Yeah, so there's a number of studies that look at sort of these individuals who occupy special positions, connecting groups and so forth, and they tend to be more creative. They tend to be better informed. They tend to do well in business situations. So there's a lot of benefits to sort of being a connector, but it's not an easy thing to do. It really takes sort of putting yourself out there. And it ends up having strong consequences. And it is important also for sort of, they can be key conduits of new ideas. Somebody who connects economists to computer scientists can help bring in new techniques from computer science into, economics. And these sorts of synergies can be really important.
We talked a little bit before about social media and its amplifying effect. Talk about it in terms of its distortion effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think one real difficulty we have these days is that social media is, allowing us to sort of be bombarded by noise at this point, and we have to be more and more reliant on filters to sort of filter that out. And it's also having sort of a perverse effect of taking away the incentives to produce deep investigative reporting. So, somebody who spends a lot of time researching something and learning about it, if you're a news service and you put that out on the internet, then it's instantly copied and disseminated by all sorts of other people, and it's very hard to earn the returns for that. So I think it's been quite disruptive. It's a great thing is it's connecting people in ways we've never been connected before, and with speed and ability to reach. But at the same time, it's going to take us a while to really figure out how do we filter the noise from the real news, and how do we make sure that people still have incentives to produce careful and thoughtful information.
It also impacts people's attention spans. I don't know how that relates to this larger networking issue, but it does have that impact.
Yeah, and I guess, it sort of deep down, we're very social animals, and we're always interested in what other people are doing. And now the fact that, I certainly wouldn't want to be a teenager these days where you can be aware of what all your friends are doing constantly. It must be overwhelming. So it's something that we're always curious, and that plays to our natural instincts, and it can be quite addictive.
When we look historically at other networking phenomenon that have happened, whether it's travel or the telephone or the printing press, what do we learn from those experiences that has relevance to what we're going through today?
I mean, I think one overwhelming lesson is that globalization has actually been a very beneficial force. So when you look at the shipping that has happened over time and the increase in trade that is basically taken place since the Second World War, that has produced the most peaceful period that we've ever had. So to some extent, the sort of increase in connectedness in the world has been a great benefit in bringing prosperity and an end to a lot of conflicts. But at the same time, it's made us more interconnected in these other ways that are difficult to overcome.
Has it made us smarter? Has the wisdom of networks, the wisdom of crowds really had an impact?
I think that's a difficult one. So on the one hand, there's a lot of kinds of basic information that's not controversial, that's easier to obtain. But I think the more that something becomes ideological and political, the more difficult it is to sort out the noise from fact. And so the more incentive people have to try and pull you in certain directions. And so, the combination of easy reach and easy production of information means that on the one hand, it's great for just finding out very simple facts, for looking up, some fact on the internet of, a historical fact. It's at your fingertips now, but trying to figure out what's actually going on in politics can be much more daunting.
And finally, what is it that we don't yet understand about how these networks work? What's the cutting edge of the work that you do right now?
Yeah, I think one of the cutting edge questions is, we're actually involved in a lot of different networks at the same time. So I cooperate with people at work, and I'm working with people. I'm getting advice from people. I might be getting help from people. I'm learning from people. All these different types of interactions are sometimes overlaid and sometimes not. And so understanding the interaction between those different types of things, it might be that there's certain people that it's great to cooperate at work or as a colleague, but they might not be the best person to ask for financial advice. And our networks tend to be the same on a lot of dimensions. And so understanding when it is that we reach different people for different things, that's something that's sort of a cutting edge question now.
Matthew Jackson, his book is The Human Network: How Your Social Position Determines Your Power, Beliefs, and Behaviors. Matthew, I thank you so much for spending time with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Thank you.